in 1820, and it was called the Western Museum. The first one was Ralph Linton's museum. Our museum is really very much like those early museums, where there's art, there's history, there's natural history, there's minerals and geological things, as well as artifacts from native sites all around Kentucky and the Ohio Valley. And it's such a wonderful place to be in. And as a curator, it keeps me on my toes, because if I were just an art expert or just a archaeology expert or just a history expert, there would be things that in times that I come here and I would open up a box and I would look in it and I would go, what is this? And I wouldn't understand the context. And there's still times that sometimes in a good collection, especially one that really has been being collected for over 100 years now, and in the auspices of a museum, 70 years now, there's always going to be little surprises, and those surprises are what I treasure about my job. The things that I love to be surprised. It's never boring. And then you get people who contact you and they'll have something new that you didn't know existed. And you hear the stories of our region. And in Northern Kentucky, we have such tremendous stories. When you think about, really some of the first people writing the stories, at least from a Western perspective, writing down things about Northern Kentucky was the French in the 1740s. And then maybe Christopher Gist was the first to write in English on his first journey in the Ohio Valley, and where he kind of traveled some in Northern Kentucky in 1750. And he first learned about and was talking to people about Big Bone Lick around March of 1750. And he was given probably a mastodon or a woolly mammoth tooth that he took back to the people he was working for in Virginia. And those stories are there. So there's Gist, and then there's so many others, whether it's Audubon that came through the region in 1819 or so, or little things that happened. The War of 1812 with soldiers coming through Newport and the barracks. All of that is part of our regional heritage and our stories. But there's also so many other stories that are here to be told. And I love it because sometimes in this museum, we get the opportunity to tell that. We have those opportunities. And every once in a while, I open up a box and I see something that maybe I don't understand initially, but it gives me a chance to research it and to learn more. So today, what I've done, we'll start with, since we always love to have the quizzes, before I go too much further, talking about maybe some of the artifacts, because I've pulled some artifacts that are just a little amount of the treasures that we have here in Behringer-Crawford to tell some of our regional history. And I've got a quiz item that I'll be honest, it stumped me for some time. So I'm going to show this to you. I'll show the item and we'll see if you can come up with what it is, because it's a really pretty interesting piece and it ties to our regional heritage. So behind me, the quiz item is this item here. And I'm going to try to show it to you.
It's a large item, Jason.
It is large. It's not exactly light either. So
is it heavy?
It's kind of heavy. It's made of wood.
Okay.
And it does also open up. So I'm going to try to manipulate this in such a way that you can see it without.
Oh, what are those? Okay, so it has pegs inside. That's interesting.
Right. The pegs inside are part of this.
Oh, and that comes off.
And that comes off. I'm going to
and we
have Mary Jane hold that for me for a moment. And it really, as you said, it's a team effort. Right now I have Mary Jane helping me, and I don't know what I would do without her helping me. So this is what this looks like without that center piece.
Hey, Jason, are those as sharp as they look?
They are sharp.
Okay. Interesting.
They're like little blades. And then the centerpiece is kind of a crank handle, and the pegs are in a spiral.
Okay. We should add that the we'll say the first person to get an exact answer will win our prize. So make it a little trickier this time. So first person to get a correct answer.
Right. And if it looks like there's a lot of people, I got a couple of other things.
Oh, nice.
And in fact, there's something that we'll talk about maybe towards the end that is going to be a little bit of an audience poll. Because I learn so much from people all around me. So we all can't be experts in everything, and I'm more than happy to learn from others. So there's something I have here. I've got a pretty good idea what it is. I don't know what its purpose was. And I'm not exactly sure how it was used. It's pretty obvious initially what it is, but then there's the questions of, okay, I know what it is, but why is it the way that it is?
Okay.
So that's something that we'll talk about maybe a little later.
Great. Hey, Jason, really quickly before you move on, I've had a question. Are we willing to say for the purpose of the quiz the age of the artifact, or is that going to give too much away? Or do we know?
I can give it, I can tell you for the purpose of the quiz, it is, that particular artifact is probably pre-Civil War.
Oh, okay. Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
It is somewhere close to 200 years old.
Perfect. All right. Well, we are already getting a lot of responses, so I'll look forward to, I don't know the answer either, so I look forward to finding out the answer toward the end of your presentation. So sorry to interrupt you. Go ahead.
Well, that's great. If should I throw in another artifact just maybe to see if people want to answer on two things?
Sure, you can. Now, I think if they answer on the second one, maybe they should kind of make a note like quiz 2, maybe. So we'll be able to.
Well, I'm just thinking if there's lots and lots of answers and lots of people may know it.
Oh, yeah.
Does it look like there's a lot of people saying the same thing?
No, they're all different.
Oh, okay. So we may have stumped them. It really did have me stumped for quite some time, actually.
Yeah.
But I will show you another artifact, also large, and I don't want to deal a whole lot with it. I know there are those who are involved with this museum that will know what it is, but the audience may not, that aren't part of this museum as much. So this could be a second quiz question. This is not complete. It's heavy. It's a section of something. And I don't know if you can see, there's a hole in it. It's made of wood.
Nice.
But it's significant to regional history and the history of growing cities in all around, but in particular our region. So that's a fun thing. So that's another little quiz question just to see what people think it is.
Okay.
Now, we talked a little about William Behringer, and just for a moment here, this is what happens when one carries, I've already ripped my gloves, which means it's a good day. Let me grab another glove so that I can handle artifacts. Those heavy wooden objects sometimes cause the demise of a glove. All right. We talked a little bit about William Behringer because William Behringer is really important to our history. And we are fortunate to have much of his many of his artifacts. And that seed collection, one of my favorite things that we have of his is William Behringer journaled. And William Behringer wrote down about many of his trips and his adventures throughout his life. You know, when he started really working at the age of, I believe, 13, he started working in a furniture factory in Covington. And he worked there for a while, but he ended up getting into really the iron industry in the foundries all around here. Well, that work is seasonal work, especially in days before refrigeration or an air conditioning. It's very much seasonal work. So you would work maybe through the winters when it's cold and you could be in a hot foundry. And then the summers you were off, which was great for him because he could travel some. And he started pretty early on writing down about his travels. This book is one of his journals. This is an earlier one. This was written down in 1907, but he talks about things that happened earlier. And he's added postcards throughout his journals of places that he has gone. And I'm trying to get this so everybody can see, but I also want to be careful because this is pretty old. And one of my favorite things in here is reading his description of going to the St. Louis World's Fair in 1904 and how he got there, because for him to even get to the fair, he actually worked odd jobs. He worked for the railroad, I think for the Baltimore and the Ohio, the B&O, and he unloaded coal cars and unloaded cars by hand in the evenings to raise the money for him and a friend to take a special train from Cincinnati to St. Louis. And to get to the train, the night before he left, he rowed a rowboat across the Ohio River from West Covington just to get to the train to go to the St. Louis World's Fair. And that's all kind of written down in this journal. And he talks about all of the things he was interested in, the days that he spent just going through all the different buildings and all the different exhibits, and the Ferris wheel, which was there, that was this enormous Ferris wheel. And it took, I think, a whole hour to get all the way around it. But in that time, you could watch things going on in the fairgrounds. And that's all part of his story, which is also part of our story, because it helps us understand the man, William Behringer. And in many of his journals, he's going out hunting or he's going somewhere around the world and he's talking about artifacts or things that he has acquired. And those things are still in our collection, which is really special for me. It's a way that I can kind of look at something and I can go, wow, that was William Behringer's. Sometimes we know because he was nice enough to write his name on it, which isn't always great in a modern museum way, but for our purposes, it's very much part of the history of this organization. It's part of that, and it helps me understand, because if it's just a hammerstone that was found at a native site, if it's just a hammerstone, we may not know, but if it's got William Behringer's writings on it, he will tell us at least where he found it or what he thought it was. And that's important to me. And it's exciting because it's part of our story. But but then, you know, it's not just William Behringer. It's guys like Ellis Crawford who helped create this museum after William Behringer died. The DeVoe family had donated their home and the grounds to the city of Covington, and they had kind of wanted the home to maybe become a museum. And the city rented it for a while, and eventually there'd been a fire, and they reworked, they worked on the house, and then when William Behringer passed away and he donated his collection to the city of Covington, Ellis worked with the city of Covington to actually go ahead and create this museum. And it was originally called the William Behringer Memorial Museum when it opened in July of 1950. So there are many things here that we can attribute to Ellis Crawford. But Ellis Crawford, as a self-taught archaeologist and an amazing collector and a brilliant man that knew so much, and I feel very honored to be kind of in his footsteps, because the people that knew Ellis, they come and they talk to me and they talk to others, and he was really a treasure. And I hope that I can live up just a little bit to Ellis Crawford's legacy. And there's so many things here that were part of his legacy. You know, he was involved in so many digs and trying to understand native culture and people in our region. And we have these amazing treasures from sites that he explored and he excavated. This is a conch shell necklace. Now, this necklace was found at a site in Boone County that he was excavating, and it's made from conch shells. It's beads made from conch shells, and these things would have been traded from around Mexico, and they made their way up to the mound cultures along the Ohio River. And, you know, 1,000 years after maybe these had been discarded or buried, Ellis came and he found these. And there's such an amazing bit of history. For me, I love seeing things like this that are obviously they've been modified and changed by human hands. And all those hands, all those years ago, the people that took the time to hand grind conch shells and then drill conch shells with maybe probably a flint drill to make a necklace to be worn is just, it's really amazing. And then somebody like Ellis to be able to find that so that we can preserve it and share that history with others. And that really, I feel, is what I'm so excited about when working here. You know, we've got treasures like this necklace, but we also have wonderful treasures. And let's see, maybe something a little newer. Well, maybe not something quite as new. And we'll go back to maybe something that William Behringer brought. Yes, I'm having Mary Jane bring me this little bit of fabric, and I have much more of this. Can everybody see it? I want to make sure you can see it. It's woven, dyed. It's a piece of strapping. But this is a little piece of fabric, probably made from llama or alpaca wool. And we have a collection that Behringer brought back from evidently a trip in South America. This is Peruvian, probably Nazca fabric or a piece of strap. We have, this is animal fiber as opposed to some of the others that we have in bits of rope and other things that are plant fibers. But when you think about this, it looks pretty good for something that's 2,000 years old. A piece of fabric, woven material that's 2,000 years old. Where, the great thing about Behringer-Crawford museums, where else are you going to see this in our region? Where could you imagine that there would be 2,000-year-old fabric in this little museum in Devou Park? I couldn't. When we first came across this, I was just in awe. I was so excited about it. And I was just in awe of this material, especially as I started looking into it, and I'm going, well, it's probably from the Nazca regions, the high Andes, and it's either Nazca or Paracas, which could make it maybe as much as 2,500 years old. But it's probably pretty safe to say it's in the Nazca region in time frame. But just a little bit of fabric that William Behringer thought of to bring home. And it's just part of his collecting. It's part of that thirst for knowledge that 200 years ago, we had many people in our region that were, and that kind of carried through as we look at how many wonderful museums we have, and how many places this idea of being educated and self-educated and taught is such an important thing to our region in northern Kentucky and in the kind of the tri-state area. It's such an honor to be a part of that. And because of that, people have collected and kept amazing treasures. I have here another document that is something that we work with a young lady named Sarah, and she loves this document. This is something she came across in our library. And I'm not going to go into a great deal of detail here, but this is a soldier's journal from the Spanish-American War. So this is in the 1890s, and this is just somebody talking about their life and what they're doing. And it's such a personal document. It's such a personal thing that we have, and it allows us to understand people and their experiences in life, and it's a treasure. And so often I talk about working here as being, in a treasure chest, and some days it's a treasure hunt. And curators in museums, we are here to try to preserve and protect and maintain a collection. And a museum has collecting policies, and we try to take in things that are going to help us advance the narratives and stories that we want to tell, that are our community stories, the stories that make us Northern Kentuckians, the stories that make us, Ohio River rats or people that live in the mid-Ohio Valley. Those stories are what we're trying to preserve. And their stories, they're so special when you can look at something that was written 100 years ago. You can see something that was decorated 150 or 200 years ago. We've got other things that have to do with the Spanish-American War as well. And one of those treasures is a hat. And if Mary Jane hands that to me, I will share this with you. This is something really cool. So this is a orderly's hat from the Spanish-American War, and they have written on it everywhere this company, which was the 3rd Kentucky, traveled, all the different forts around the mainland United States, and then eventually they went to Cuba. So it's the 3rd Kentucky, and it's Company C. And this is a beautiful hat and a wonderful treasure that we have that kind of helps us understand the story of soldiers that were living at the time that may have been Northern Kentucky soldiers and their travels through training and ending up in Cuba in
Hey,
the
Jason,
Spanish-American War. Yes.
when at what kind of time would they have worn a hat like that? Is that something like more of an informal kind of a?
Well, this is generally called a campaign hat.
Okay.
So this hat would have been generally just soldiers would have wore it, to keep the sun off of them during campaigns and things. It's a fairly common hat. This one, as an orderly's hat, we did a little research, and I don't believe this actually belonged to an individual, as orderly was almost like a rank that passed or a job.
I see.
At the time, it's my understanding of how that worked at the time, from the research that's been done by coworkers I've had over the last couple of years. But yes, this campaign hat is actually kind of like a fatigue hat.
Okay.
So it's not dress uniform, but it
Sure.
is a uniform hat. And it would have been just a regular wear hat.
Yeah.
But this one they decided to decorate and tell the story of
Yeah.
really their company
Everywhere
and
they've
the
gone.
Kentucky is decorated on it, which is just you don't see that's such a rare thing. The
Very
historians that we've contacted that are Third Kentucky historians are extremely excited about that very hat because it wasn't necessarily known. But that's, people decorate things to tell stories. One of my favorite artifacts in this museum is this powder horn. And the powder horns, of course, were used to keep black powder in them when you're using muzzle loading shotguns and rifles. This one is a hunting horn. And this is going to be really hard to see, unfortunately, with our camera equipment today. This one's from 1824. This is a Federalist horn or Federalist period horn. And what's great about it is very much a Kentucky horn. It has on it, on the base here, we find, so I can see it, there's a little man here who is hunting maybe geese. And he's wearing a tailcoat and a top hat. And he's going out with a shotgun, and his dog's with him, and he's shot a goose or a duck. And that story is kind of played out here on the bottom of this horn. And here, I believe he is. Now, in the middle part of the horn, it's the same top hat wearing gentleman, and he's got his dogs chasing a fox, which is a very Kentucky pastime, is a fox hunt. So he's got his dogs chasing a fox. He's not riding a horse like you think of as the English fox hunting. He's got his horse, he's just walking behind it. He just is enjoying listening to his dogs bark and chasing this fox. So he's just kind of walking the horse behind him. The dogs are chasing a fox. He's put it in here on this horn. Now, as we get up here towards the end of the horn, he's back on this picture, or he's scrimshawed in here, is him giving the goose he shot on the bottom to his wife, his girlfriend, his mother. I don't know whom she is, but she's got a big hat with feathers in it and a nice dress and a pipe sticking out of her mouth. And it just is such a wonderful kind of Kentucky powder horn. It's not, an 18th century one. This didn't belong to Daniel Boone or Simon Kenton, but it's just a wonderful little powder horn that would have been a little hunting horn that maybe a gentleman or somebody would carry with them that's telling a little bit of his story. And that's all history is, isn't it? It's just stories. And, you look at something like this, and I love looking at it and determining the story. And there's so many things that we can do that with here. And there's so many stories that are relevant to our whole region. Mary Jane, if you'll get that right here under this. When we think about Ellis Crawford, and we think about his contributions to our region in places like Big Bone Lick, Ellis was with some local young people digging at Big Bone Lick around, I think, 1959. And he found with them a mastodon jawbone. But he had a passion for Big Bone Lick before then. And he wanted Big Bone Lick. I hope you can see this. He wanted Big Bone Lick to be a state park. And right here, with Ellis's, I believe, Northern Kentucky Archaeological Society, here is his plans for Big Bone Lick to become a park that he came up with in 1953. And this is something that we came across today in our collection. I had never seen this before until today. We've been working in the collections, and here is this wonderful little treasure that's a treasure that's related to our museum, but also related to a state park and our regional history. And it's just a fun thing. And the stories that we think about, at Big Bone Lick, the thousands of years that things were going on there, and the hundreds of years that the Western world has been around it. And then we have a gentleman like Ellis Crawford, who understood its importance, and he wanted to make it into a state treasure. And that was his plan that they wanted to come up with to make a park. And that didn't happen until after they found the mastodon jawbone, which you can come and see here. Then the state understood, yeah, there's still a lot there. Because if you think about it, people had been pulling bones and artifacts out of Big Bone Lick for 200 years before Ellis and the young people found the mastodon jawbone. So, it would be easy to think, well, maybe there's nothing there anymore. Maybe there's nothing good there anymore. But Ellis proved them wrong, and his vision of Big Bone Lick becoming a park was something that was able to happen. And that's just so exciting to me, to be in those kinds of places. Now, we talked about the DeVoos maybe wanting us to have an art museum or a museum here. And if you've come here and you visited, you know that there's a tremendous amount of art from regional artists. And one that we have a great deal of art from is Harlan Hubbard. Harlan Hubbard was born in, I believe, Bellevue, Kentucky, around 1900. His father, I understand, was an artist, but he had a brother, Frank, who was an artist. He had another brother that went by Lucian, who was a early film director and producer in Hollywood in the 1920s. Harlan was an artist and really a talented guy. He even built the home that he and his mother lived in for years. And when his mother had passed away around 1943, he started building a shanty boat, and he's an author as well. So there's books like Shanty Boat that tell the story of he and his wife, Anna, as they travel in a shanty boat down the Ohio River and kind of live on the fringes of society. Harlan was an interesting man throughout his life, and he lived into the 1980s, well into the 1980s. Well, we are fortunate to have behind me is one of my favorite. I really enjoy very much a lot of Harlan Hubbard's artwork, but I like a lot of the earlier stuff. And I have a weakness for cabins. And behind me is this wonderful Harlan Hubbard painting with a cabin that was probably painted in the 1930s. Now, this is, he's got a studio in Fort Thomas that he built behind the house that he built for his mother in 1923. So this could have been painted in the studio, or it could have been painted somewhere in Campbell County. But it's just a beautiful little pastoral scene with a cabin in it. And it's one of my favorites because I've got a weakness for cabins. I love frontier history, but just his art isn't everything that we have with Harlan. And in the last year or so, we've been given a tremendous archive from that came through a woman that had grown up in the house after Harlan and his wife moved away and lived in the shanty boat, a woman named Mia Cunningham. And Mia wrote a book actually about Harlan's wife, Anna. But before Mia had passed away, she was working on these she wanted to write a book about Harlan's early years because little is known about his life in northern Kentucky in the early years. So she had contacted much of the family and it had acquired over many years artifacts dealing from Harlan's mother, Rose, and other family members. And here in my hand is this little, just says notebook. And on the spine, it says 1911, 1912. This is one of Rose's diaries, little journals, her day journals, where she talks about what she was doing. And in these years, 1911, Harlan Hubbard, that we so admire as an artist, he was an 11-year-old boy. So when she talks about Harlan in this, she's talking about maybe taking him to the city across the river to go to the stores to look at Christmas toys. And it's just such a fun thing to see. Just the personal aspect of history. Sometimes we look at people and we admire them and we think about them in their adult state, but there's so much we can learn about them in different times in their life. So for me, going through our collection with all its little subtle nuances that are such a part of our regional history, some of it's recent, some of it's very old. Another artifact that I have that I know what it is, and it's one of a kind. We don't have a pair, it's a shoe. And it's this shoe here. So some of you may recognize what this is. It's a sandal. It's a sandal made from a tire. It's a sandal that would have been made in Vietnam. So this dates to the Vietnam War. And this was a Vietnamese made sandal, maybe Viet Cong or somebody made this sandal, and it's made from a recycled tire. The Vietnamese are tremendously good at recycling materials. Somebody brought this back from Vietnam and it ended up in our wonderful museum. And I look at it and I wonder, well, why did they bring it back? And the answer that I can come up with as bringing back a single shoe is this tire that this sandal was made from was made in Dayton, Ohio. So for me, this little bit of rubber traveled from Ohio to Vietnam. It was repurposed. It was found, and then it was carried by a soldier probably, because this reminded him of home, likely. and he carried it through conflict, through whatever his life was like while he was in Vietnam. He kept this little sandal with him, and he brought it back to pretty close to where it was made to begin with. Now, I don't know the full story. Maybe the GI had worked at the factory. Maybe he had a family member that worked at the factory. Maybe he was from Dayton, Kentucky, and the Dayton, Ohio just reminded him of home. I don't know. But that's what I love about working in a history museum and working in collections, is the stories, the personal stories that we get as we explore our history, and we learn about all of the things that go on that make up daily life over hundreds of years or thousands of years. What's it really like to be a Northern Kentuckian? What's it really like to live here in our community, to work in Covington, or to work in Newport, or to be on a farm in Boone County or in Campbell County? What are those stories? Why do we do what we do, and what makes us unique? Because our community is full of treasures. We've got people that are treasures. We've got stories that are treasures. And as a curator, as a museum people, we want to preserve those treasures so that we can share them with other people, so that we can have these moments where we're holding something, or we allow somebody to get close to and experience something that was touched or created by other human hands 200 years, 300 years, 1,000 years before us. It's exciting to see, and then we've got mysteries. It's a treasure hunt. There's things that are legitimately mysteries. I don't know. How are we doing on time?
We're doing okay. We have about 10 minutes left. We have a couple of questions.
All right.
One of the questions that was asked about actually the cloth, but I kind of have a question about just in general.
Yes.
Is when you are dating something. The original question was, how do you know that the cloth is about 2,000 years old? But how do you do that? I know a little bit briefly, but in general, how do you find that out?
Well, there are various forms of different dating techniques.
Mm-hmm.
For me, I'm putting about a 2,000-year-old circa on it. It's with other fabric. It is clearly stylistically in that Nazca Paracas style of fabric. It's high Andes. That's why it still exists. It comes from a desert area that gets so very little rain that it's so dry. If we had 2,000-year-old fabric that was found in a native context around here, because of the heat and cold, it's just gone. It rots away. And the only way that we know that say the Hopewell people may have had fabric at all is when we find it underneath bits of copper that was decorating in grave goods. This material probably is also a grave good, but those Andean in the Paracas, Nazca areas in the high Andes in Peru are so dry, those cemeteries exist, and it basically naturally mummifies the bodies. So, there are others that go through and they do a lot of research, and sometimes we can, if we really wanted to invest in say a carbon-14 dating or something, we could maybe pinpoint a date a little more. This, for me, looking at it, it kind of tells me regionally where it's from, and then you look at the cultures that we know that lived there, yeah, and the styles of design that they used. We've got rough ideas of the dates that they used those designs, and that's where I can kind of give a rough circa. I can't say for certain that it's, that it was made in June 15th, the year one, but I can say that it's stylistically within that region. the Nazca people existed until about 500 AD. There was an overlap with the Paracas people, who the Paracas people started about 500 BC. So for about 1,000 years in the middle, there was an overlap stylistically within the people. Paracas tended to use more effigy and human and animal forms in their fabrics and materials. This is more geometric, and the bits of dyed fabric that we have is very much geometric. So I'm leaning towards Nazca over Paracas, but it really could be either, and it's in that roughly between 500 BC to 500 AD range, which puts it pretty close to 2,000 years old.
That's very cool. I want to take a chance. I was going to mention this later, but I think this is a good opportunity to let people know that you are going through our collection and giving these kinds of highlights kind of individually on a very regular basis through your curator chats.
Yes.
And people can find those, I know, on YouTube. I know we normally post them on Facebook as well. And I would just really encourage anyone. They're really interesting, Jason, and they're relatively short. So, you know, if you just have it's almost like a visual podcast. It's pretty short and easily accessible.
Yeah, they tend to be about 3 to 5 minutes, depending on how long-winded I get, but usually pretty short.
Now, they're really interesting. The other question that we had was how many pieces of the collection, or maybe more of like a percentage, is typically on display at any given time?
We've got a pretty extensive collection. So, and this is going to be a really rough, kind of educated guess.
Mm-hmm.
I would say 15 to 20% tops of our collection is on display, and it may not even be that much. We've got a pretty, when you look at a museum that's been collecting there's been a collection that's been growing for over 100 years now. When you look at William Behringer's stuff through now, there's a lot. And there's a lot of really great treasures that we have that I couldn't show because of size or, you know, or other items. You know, we've got wonderful dresses from the Civil War from Northern Kentucky, or right in that Civil War area from Northern Kentucky. We've got muskets from the War of 1812, or we have a musket from the War of 1812. So there's lots of really great other things that we have that, just for the purpose of this conversation this evening, we didn't have space for. And some of that's on display. We try to rotate our collections as much as we can, for both the preservation of artifacts, but also so that our guests have the opportunity to see something new. And we're always kind of trying to work with our exhibits to bring something new to our guests. And we're always frequently taking in new treasures. I've got a wonderful collection that just came in that is all dealing with Latonia Springs Dairy and the Sumi and Rowdeman Dairy. And it's really cool stuff that we've got. So whether it's amazing streetcar memorabilia or Stewart Iron Works or you know, dairy stuff like Latonia Springs, or a tremendous Bavarian brewery collection, including things like a accounting record, a ledger, like accounting ledger for from 1917 that tells us like when they were selling one type of truck and buying a new truck, and just, you know, how much they were spending on hops or whatever they were doing at the time. We've got treasures like that sometimes we can't always display.
Sure. Well, hey, I want to make sure that those who are with us know about the quiz. Why don't you tell us just quickly what was the item in quiz 1?
The item in quiz 1 is a tobacco grinder. It is a primitive tobacco grinder from pre-Civil War, probably even, you know, probably in that 18 to say 30 or 40 range, and it is used to cut up tobacco leaves to grind it up so you can have pipe tobacco.
Now,
So it would lay flat. It's kind of standing up. It would lay flat, and you would feed tobacco leaves into it. It presses them through those blades, and it chops them up, and they come out the other hole on the backside, and you've got basically pipe tobacco that you can use at that point.
so Jason, I don't want to get into anything controversial here, and we only have a couple minutes left, but the closest guess we had was from John Bowe, and he guessed a hemp shredder. Am I guessing that that is not really the same?
It's not quite the same.
Okay.
And the hemp shredders, hemp they usually break and then fiber. And so to my understanding, this is tobacco. It's a similar probably technique, or it's similar farm tool, but usually you break hemp and then you pull the fibers that way.
Okay. Well, now what about quiz? Sorry, John, you'll have to keep tuning in and try to win again. And
Sorry, John.
thank you for everyone who guessed, because no one got it. But thank you.
It was a tough one, and I'm sorry. It took us a while to get that.
Well, that's okay, because I believe we have 2 correct answers for quiz 2. So why don't you tell us what that was?
Quiz 2, this massive log piece is a piece of wooden water pipe.
There we go. So congratulations to Blanche Sullivan and Scott Clark. You will be the proud owners. I'm going to go ahead and give it to both of them since we did not have a winner on quiz 1. You will be the owners of your very own Northern Kentucky History Hour pin. So anyway, very exciting.
Scott.
Very exciting. Jason, I think we are going to have to say goodbye.
Okay, we didn't even get to my mystery share thing, but that's okay. We'll figure that out some other time.
Yeah, we'll have to have you back, and we definitely will, and we'll have an opportunity for the audience to have some interactive activities and try to guess. I did want to let everyone know that there is a wealth of information about the museum and our collections and rotating exhibits on our website. So just a reminder that they can go to bcmuseum.org for that, as well as our Facebook page and YouTube, lots of places. I also wanted to just thank everyone again for making this happen, and thanks to all of our viewers. We really appreciate you hanging with us. I did want to also say that next week we will be back again with a very exciting guest, Janine Kreinbrink, who is the president of KNV Cultural Resources Management and the archaeology associate for the museum. She is going to be talking about the batteries that dot our Northern Kentucky landscape. They were the fortifications that the men, women, and children, apparently, of Northern Kentucky, never really thought about it being a family affair, but that the Northern Kentucky community built to protect the region during the Civil War. So very much looking forward to hearing from her. And I cannot wait to see you all again next week. And Jason, we'll have to have you back soon. But in the meantime, we will be looking for your curators' chats. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone. Take care.